Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the Chief Executive of RBS tells MPs a decision to close more than 50 branches of the bank will not be reversed. The suspended Conservative councillor from Aberdeen who owes thousands of pounds in council tax arrears. Lawyers for the Scottish Government suggest there is no ban on fracking following a legal challenge from the oil industry. Scotland's reputation as a place of racial tolerance is a myth, according to research from the University of Glasgow.
It annoyed me, it upset me and it hurt me because I'm born and brought up in this country.
Also on the programme, the chances of stroke survivors in Scotland getting back to normal life could be disadvantaged through ignorance about rehabilitation, says a leading charity. Good evening. The Royal Bank of Scotland's Chief Executive, Ross McEwan, has told MPs a decision to close more than 50 branches in Scotland will not be reversed. Mr McEwan faced claims he doesn't understand the needs of rural communities when he was questioned by politicians earlier. He said he realised there was anger at the closures, but they made commercial sense. Our political correspondent Nick Eardley was watching.
It's still one of the world's biggest banks, but on a local level, RBS branches can be important parts of communities too. The decision to close 52 across Scotland provoked anger. A further 10, including this one in Biggar, could close too.
Well, it would be very difficult for me as a business person and most of the other self-employed people and businesses in the town, because we depend on the bank for our day-to-day takings.
I think it would be disastrous for Biggar. We have an elderly population, me fast approaching it too. They could not negotiate a bank van.
This morning the bank's chief executive was summoned to explain the closures. Ross McEwan said banking is changing and RBS needs to change too.
Let's be clear, when we look at our customer behaviour, the evidence is stark. Branch use has fallen dramatically. The great majority of our customers want to bank when it suits them and at all hours.
Where branches close, alternatives will be made available, but some say that's not enough.
You know, if they don't have mobile signal, if they don't have broadband, all the alternative options which you've tried to describe to us this morning are very often just not available to those communities and those residents. So I think you've completely misunderstood how many of your customers do banking.
Taxpayers are still the biggest shareholder in RBS. The UK government doesn't want to interfere in commercial decisions, but others say the bank has responsibilities.
The bank seems to have forgotten that it provides a service to the community. The bank seems purely interested in maximising the profits with the loss of its community responsibilities.
I just disagree with that. Well, when you have 2,000 places of face-to-face, it is different to having a branch network, but it is a face-to-face interaction, be that with one of our mobile vans and the people that run them, be that with a post office, be that with our community people that are in the community, our community bankers.
Mr McEwan confirmed the decision to close 52 branches is final, but there will be a review on the future of 10 others.
My view is if they come back and say, for example, all 10 should stay open, we will leave those all 10 open.
Mr McEwan also pledged there will be no further branch cuts before 2020, but he's adamant banking is changing and that means fewer branches on rural high streets. Nick Eardley, Reporting Scotland, Westminster.
Well, let's get more from our business correspondent, David Henderson, who's at an RBS branch in Steps in North Lanarkshire, which is due to close next month. David, there's been huge pressure on the Royal Bank to abandon this closure programme. So where does that campaign stand now?
Well, it's hit a brick wall for now, at least. If MPs thought that RBS bosses were going to cave in to pressure and reverse this decision to close all these branches, including this one, well, they'll be disappointed tonight because there is no plan to reverse these closures. And as far as even the 10 branches that were granted a reprieve by RBS, well, we were told today that their future will depend on commercial grounds. And I think this was really the fault line at today's hearing. On one side of the room, you had MPs saying, look, RBS was saved by a bailout from taxpayers it's payback time. You've got to deliver something for local communities. And on the other side of the room, you had Ross McEwen, RBS's chief executive, pushing back and saying, no, that money was loaned to RBS to allow it to rebuild as a commercial operation, and there will be difficult commercial decisions to be made along the way. Now, of course, Ross McEwen had an ace up his sleeve today. The UK government owns the majority stake in RBS, and the Prime Minister is not willing to second-guess RBS, does not want him to reverse this closure programme so he can push ahead with his plans regardless of local opposition.
And David, there's the prospect of more big changes for bank customers today with a major and significant announcement.
Yes, the owners of Clydesdale Bank have said they're willing to spend more than £1.5 billion to buy Virgin Money. It's a big deal for Scotland because Clydesdale Bank are headquartered in Glasgow. Virgin Money are based in Edinburgh. It's also a big deal for customers because this merger would create a very big, very powerful challenger bank, one that's able to really compete with the very big banks like Lloyds and with RBS. So it offers the potential for customers to have much more choice on the high street when it comes to things like mortgages and savings accounts.
David, thank you very much for all of that. Detectives investigating the murder of a man shot at a set of traffic lights in Glasgow say they've recovered forensic information from a car they believe was used in the attack. Kenny Riley was targeted last month while he sat in the passenger seat of a car in Maryhill. Police believe the gunman got out of a black Ford S-Max which had been stolen from the Giffnock area in March. It was later found burnt out in Craigieburn Gardens.
Anybody who has seen that S-Max clearly stolen, 17th and 18th of March, as I say, it's almost a month before the shooting of Kenny Riley. It has been getting driven in the area of Glasgow with false registration plates on it. I would appeal to anybody who thinks they may have seen this vehicle to come forward and tell us.
A court heard DNA matching the murder accused in a trial was found on a hooded top inside a burnt-out Audi. 33-year-old David Scott denies murdering Ewan Johnson, who was 26, by shooting him in the head. The jury at the High Court in Glasgow has previously heard that a blue Audi was seen speeding along a street in the south side of Glasgow around the time Mr Johnson was shot in November 2016. The Crown case has now closed. The trial continues. An Aberdeenshire councillor who lives in a castle hasn't been paying his council tax. Conservative Sebastian Leslie, whose daughter is the Game of Thrones actress Rose Leslie, is thousands of pounds in arrears. He says he's been withholding the cash as part of a long-running campaign to highlight alleged corruption. He's been suspended by the Conservative Party and a disciplinary investigation is underway. Rebecca Curran reports.
He might have failed to keep up with council tax payments, but he still gets his bins emptied. Councillor Sebastian Leslie owns this castle in Aberdeenshire and 2 other properties. He's more than £2,000 in arrears.
I made it abundantly clear that everybody pays account, and I am paying my council tax.
You keep saying that.
No, but Rebecca, I'm not going to go through.
You're more than £2,500 in arrears.
Absolutely, and that is going to be finished very soon. I'm paying an agreed amount every month. It's perfectly acceptable to Aberdeenshire Council, it's acceptable to me, and it's acceptable under the law.
He says he stopped paying to highlight a campaign against corruption in the Scottish banking system and admits his protest is part of the reason he stood for election last year.
I love my area, I know this area, I've been brought up here, and that's why I stood. Of course, in the back of my mind, I thought this could be useful. I could use this for actually trying to expose the destruction of these poor souls and businesses by greed and corruption in the banking system. Of course that was in the back of my mind.
Councillor Leslie was suspended by the Conservative Party last month. He remains a member of the ruling administration here at Aberdeenshire Council as an independent, but because he's missed council tax payments, he's not allowed to attend certain meetings.
Quite frankly, he should just pay up and shut up. If he's quite capable of paying the council tax, then that's exactly what he should do. I think people in Aberdeenshire will have very little sympathy, particularly those who struggle to meet their obligations. They'll have very little sympathy for this kind of petulant protest.
The Scottish Conservatives say they can't comment when disciplinary proceedings are ongoing. Rebecca Curran, reporting Scotland, Aberdeenshire.
Is fracking banned in Scotland? There seems to be some confusion. The petrochemical giant Ineos has begun a legal challenge to try to overturn the Scottish Government's ban on fracking, claiming it's unlawful. Lawyers for the Scottish Government say the firm is mistaken in thinking there's a ban in place. They insist ministers are still considering their position. But here's what the First Minister had to say back in October.
Fracking is being banned in Scotland. End of story. There will be no fracking in Scotland. I don't think that position could be any clearer.
Our environment correspondent Kevin Keane is at the Ineos plant at Grangemouth this evening. Kevin, is fracking banned or not?
Well, you heard Nicola Sturgeon saying there that it very definitely is banned, and that came days after a statement from the Energy Minister who described it as an indefinite moratorium, an effective ban, and questions were asked about exactly what that means. Now, the problem that the Scottish Government has is back in October when this decision was made, the issue of onshore oil and gas licensing was a reserved matter, reserved to Westminster, and so they had to do this through the planning process by instructing local authorities not to give planning permission to any fracking-related activities. Ineos is arguing that that was out with their jurisdiction. Well, that power has now been devolved as part of the Smith Commission, and so if a decision is now made, a final decision in October of this year, it will be within the Scottish Parliament's competency. Of course, it does leave them wide open to criticism from their opponents, the Scottish Conservatives, who you'll remember are in favour of fracking, saying that this is a staggering defence, and they say that if the Scottish Government has not yet banned fracking, then the SNP should be telling its MSPs, many of whom they say have been bragging about it up and down the country.
Thank you very much. Kevin Keane at Grangemouth. A teenager who tried to rape 2 joggers on a secluded canal path in Glasgow has been sentenced to 6 years detention. 19-year-old Calvin Higgins pounced on his victims after lying in wait near student halls in the Maryhill area in March last year. He threatened one of his terrified victims with a knife. The court ordered him to be on licence for 3 years after his release. The family of a Caithness man who was found dead in Wick Harbour more than 20 years ago say police are to interview 15 potential witnesses following new information. Kevin MacLeod's death was initially treated as an accident, but his family remain convinced he was murdered. The police have apologised in the past for failings in the investigation. In a statement, Police Scotland say they are actively looking into new evidence provided by the family, though for now the death remains unexplained. A criminal investigation is being held into the sinking of the Nancy Glen fishing boat in Argyll earlier this year. The trawler went down in Loch Fyne in January with the loss of crewman and Premet Kravchik and Duncan McDougall. A third fisherman on board survived and raised the alarm. The Crown Office has confirmed that the Procurator Fiscal has instructed Police Scotland to investigate the circumstances around the deaths of the 2 men. We may like to think of Scotland as more open and tolerant than other parts of the UK, but that's a myth, according to the authors of a new book on racism, even though the number of racial crimes is falling. The Scottish Government says we can't afford to be complacent. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
We market ourselves as one of the most welcoming countries on the planet.
While that may be the experience for the majority of tourists who come to Scotland, is it also true for those who choose to settle here from around the world?
Shahbaz Ali came to Scotland as a refugee from war-torn Syria. He's now in hospital in Edinburgh with multiple stab wounds after what police suspect was a racially aggravated attack. In Glasgow, Shabana Naz has experienced verbal abuse because of the colour of her skin.
It annoyed me, it upset me, and it hurt me because I'm born and brought up in this country. And like I said, I did believe that it's faded away, which it clearly hasn't.
The academics behind this new book believe we're too ready to play down the extent of the problem in Scotland.
The racism myth is simply that Scotland has less racism compared to other countries, particularly compared to England. I think that is the major thing that we have to shatter and make us face the fact that not because of something that English people have done or something that Westminster has done, there are problems within Scottish society itself that allows racism to exist, and we have to recognise those and deal with it. And then maybe we will be a country which doesn't have a racist problem, but it's only by recognising it first we can actually get to that point.
Racial crime is the most commonly reported hate crime in Scotland. Last year, in 3,349 cases, charges were brought by police. But that was the lowest total for 13 years, and there is a downward trend. But ministers insist there is no complacency.
We do continue to have problems in Scotland with discrimination, prejudice and disadvantage, and therefore it's beholden on people like me, people in government, to do everything that we can within government and out with government to tackle discrimination where it exists.
The Scottish Government moved quickly to offer Syrian refugees a home here. But that doesn't mean everyone in Scotland is as open to those from different countries, different cultures. Glenn Campbell, Reporting Scotland.
You're watching BBC Reporting Scotland. It's exactly 7:15. A reminder of tonight's top story. The Chief Executive of RBS tells MPs a decision to close more than 50 Scottish bank branches will not be reversed. And still to come, John Higgins pledges he'll be back for more after losing his second World Snooker Championship final in a row. When someone suffers a stroke, making a good recovery often involves relearning basic skills. But now a charity is warning that a lack of information about rehabilitation services means some stroke survivors in Scotland are finding it difficult to get back to normal life. The Scottish Government says it's committed to making sure stroke victims have the best possible access to care. Andrew Black's been speaking to one survivor.
I can remember my sore head, but then I just collapsed.
Graham Clark recalls one of his darkest days. He was fit and healthy, but 3 years ago had a stroke while competing in a triathlon. He now has to cope with the lasting physical effects of what happened.
I've got epilepsy now. I've got no feeling in my right hand arm. My speech is a bit dodgy, and my balance on my right hand side is weaker than my left.
Graham got many months of care on the NHS, but after being discharged, he struggled to find services to continue his rehabilitation. At times, it's been difficult for him and his young family.
My wife and I trawled through the internet and found out who would provide this and who would provide that. It's just, it needs a bit more work.
Andrea Kale works to support people who have strokes. She says hospitals provide services like physiotherapy, but says there's no proper information on what help's on offer in local communities.
We'd like to understand where the services are, and then we would like to see who is accessing them and how long they're accessing them for, because without that information it's really difficult to know where good practice is happening, but also where areas are that need improvements to be made.
The Scottish Government says it wants to do more to help people like Graham. Ministers say they're working closely with health staff, voluntary and community groups to make sure anyone suffering a stroke gets access to the best care as quickly as possible. Andrew Black, Reporting Scotland.
New approaches to cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's and diabetes are being opened up by Scotland's most powerful microscope. It's just been unveiled at a laboratory jointly run by Heriot-Watt and Edinburgh universities. Our science correspondent Kenneth MacDonald has more.
In 3D and colour, this is a paramecium, a living single-celled organism that eats bacteria. We're looking at something a microscope shouldn't be able to see. Microscopes have a limit, and it's a limit set by light. Light diffracts. When it hits a corner, it will bend round it. Now what that means is there's only so small you can go with a light-based microscope before things get very blurry indeed. Or at least that was the case until now. This microscope uses a Nobel Prize-winning technique called stimulated emission depletion, STED.
What's being revealed as we move through the movie here is what we can see if we use STED, so if we use the super resolution technique. So we can see a lot more structure, things get a lot smaller, and so we can just find out more information about how structures are related to each other and where they are in space and time on a very, very, very small scale.
Electron microscopes can go smaller, but their samples have to be dead. Bad news for biologists.
Even with a very fancy microscope, and we've got lots of very advanced systems here, we can see things which are around about the order of 250 nanometers in size. So just to put that in context, that's 250 billionths of a meter, and these things are pretty much as small to you as Jupiter is big. So it's very hard for us to understand really how small these things are. With the new STED system, we can see things which are roughly 10 times smaller than that.
The new microscope is available to researchers worldwide, not just biologists, but work on diseases like diabetes and Parkinson's is already showing promise.
That kind of information, I think, really will go forward to helping with treatment, with helping with diagnosis, and just trying to understand better what happens in the diseases so that we can treat them and prevent them, hopefully.
We've got people from materials sciences, so they're looking at new sorts of polymers and plastics which may or may not be useful for biology or something else. We've got people looking at microprocessors, and we've even got people looking at space dust, coming to see what sort of structures can they determine.
It shows why it's important for scientists to know more and more about less and less. Kenneth MacDonald, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Now sport, and Celtic manager Brendan Rodgers has rejected the idea his club's domestic dominance would be undermined by failure to qualify for the Champions League. He was responding to suggestions from the Rangers chairman Dave King that Celtic's strength would be significantly weakened should they fail to win the league and reach the Champions League for one season.
The board have done a brilliant job here in ensuring that the pillars of the club are very strong, and that there's a way forward here. And I think that for Celtic, we're defined on what we do, not on anyone else. We always respect every team and every club, but I'm not one to be looking over the garden fence at anyone else.
Now, he may have lost 2 World Snooker Championship finals in a row, but John Higgins says despite the heartbreak, he'll be back next year to give it another go. The 43-year-old from Wishaw narrowly missed out in a thrilling final to Mark Williams after mounting a stunning comeback. More from David Curry.
It was an heroic comeback, but ultimately all John Higgins could do was watch Mark Williams end it.
John Higgins will not be coming back to the table now except to shake his hand and congratulate him. What a match, what a performance.
From 14 frames to 7 down, the Wishaw Wizard fought back to 15 all, but couldn't get the better of his Welsh opponent.
The atmosphere in there was just incredible again. It's just an unbelievable feeling, an unbelievable arena to play snooker in. And the juices were flowing, and it was, as I said, that's what you live for, these moments. And obviously I just come up short, but that's me lost in 2 finals in a row, and it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking.
Receiving a cheque for £425,000, the trophy and the title, 2018 Betfred World Snooker Champion, Mark Williams.
A year ago, Williams was on the verge of quitting the sport, promising if he ever won the world title again, he'd hold a media conference naked. He kept his word. No rash promises from this 4-time world champion though, just this pledge.
I think the last 2 years I've come through and played well and got to the 2 finals. There is no reason to fall away. Now surely I can maybe come back and give a good fist at next year again, but I'll be back. I'll definitely be back to give it another go.
David Curry, reporting Scotland.
Time to get the weather forecast from Christopher. Where did that lovely sunshine go?
I know. Well, there was some of it this morning, Sally. Thank you very much indeed. Hello there, good evening to you. Yes, this was North Berwick a little earlier, holding on to those blue skies, but for many of us, it was a case of grey skies and some wet weather at times, and this is the reason why. A weather front moving west to east across the country. There it is on the satellite and radar. You can see it's sweeping east across the country. So if you got wet, that's why. Now, though, starting to clear away. So over the next few hours, that weather front disappears out to the North Sea. It leaves us with fairly dry conditions overnight, a mixture of clouds, some clear spells, and a cooler night than of late. Town and city temperatures around 5 or 6 Celsius at their lowest, but some rural parts of the northeast and southeast a chilly 3 or 4. Tomorrow, another weather front moving in off the Atlantic, so a day very similar to today weather-wise. It starts OK and goes downhill. Here's tomorrow morning, a dry, fine start, best of the sunshine in the morning in the east once again. Further west, though, you can see the cloud, you can see the rain, and that wet weather starts to spread its way eastwards through parts of the mainland from late morning and early afternoon. So come mid-afternoon, well, it's looking pretty wet for many central and western areas. The rain heavier compared with what we had today, and the winds stronger from the south as well, a fresh southerly, perhaps strong through the Minches, and a cool feel, 11, 12, 13 Celsius. Still the odd dry moment at times around the Murray Firth, perhaps the northern parts of Aberdeenshire, but elsewhere fairly cloudy and damp, although the rain not expected to reach Shetland until tomorrow evening. So the rest of the afternoon into the evening, that wet weather still working its way eastwards, a slow improvement from the west, but little in the way of sunshine really before dusk. And then, looking ahead to Thursday, that weather front well away from us up towards Scandinavia, a brief ridge of high pressure. So Thursday, somewhat drier, somewhat brighter, still a few showers around. These most likely in the west, heavy at times, the odd rumble of thunder, perhaps some hail. So driest, brightest and sunniest for longest in the east. Temperatures starting to rise again too. And then looking ahead towards Friday, high pressure out east, low pressure out west, a weather front precariously close by. And at the moment, it's forecast to stay out to the sea. But, well, it is a forecast and that rain could well come further east. So if Friday's weather is important to you, make sure this isn't the last forecast that you catch. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you very much. Now, a reminder of tonight's main news. President Trump appears to be ready to announce that he's pulling the US out of the international nuclear agreement with Iran. Mr. Trump is due to make an official statement shortly. The deal, agreed in 2015, limits Iran's nuclear program in return for a lifting of economic sanctions. The Royal Bank of Scotland's Chief Executive Ross McEwan has told MPs a decision to close more than 50 branches in Scotland will not be reversed. And lawyers for the Scottish Government suggest there's no ban on fracking following a legal challenge from the oil industry. That's it for now. I'll be back with a late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. But until then, from everyone on the team here, right around the country, goodbye. Have a very good evening.